Welcome to the video game review for the week that was December 14 to December 21. I'm Colin.
I'm John.
And this week, we're discussing representations of LGBTQ characters in video games. So let's get started. John, before we dig in too much, how was your week?
It's not too bad. Dealing with a little bit of an illness right now, so I apologize if my voice is very deep and raspy. I'm kind of pulling a Soldier 76. No, I'm not really.
Yeah, and that's apt. So John's on his way in to getting sick. I'm on my way out, so we're both not going to sound best. But before we get in, I just want to visit something totally unrelated to the topic quickly, because I think it was 3 days ago, I finished Final Fantasy 15.
Oh.
And
And
yes, and I just want to say to anyone who's sitting on the fence, I want to say two things. One, it is a mess of a game. There are narrative, not just plot holes, just gaping sections of content missing. The last 2 hours, 3 hours, it's kind of one of the worst 3 hours in the Final Fantasy game I think I've ever played. Except for maybe the closing 30 minutes. But so there's some kind of graphical chugging at times. But on the whole, I want to say after the letdown, I think that many people would agree that was Final Fantasy 13 and the Final Fantasy 13 series, despite my really strong reservations and significant problems with the game, kind of inexcusable problems given that it's a 10-year development cycle on this one. I kind of want to say Final Fantasy's redeemed.
wow.
They are. It's not. If you're going in expecting 7 or 8 or 10, it's not one of those.
Skipping 9.
It's not one of those. But there's enough good ideas in it that I'm excited. For the first time in a long time, I'm excited for the future of Final Fantasy, and I want to give the game a lot of credit for doing that. They misfire a lot. A lot doesn't work, but enough does that I just wanted to make sure everybody watching, if you're on the fence, I think it's on sale right now on Amazon. $35. I'd go out and pick it up, definitely.
Hang on a second. And buying? I don't even own a PS4 and I'm buying it. Excuse me. Anyway, moving on.
Yes, so moving on to our featured topic of the week. As I said, this week we're discussing representations of LGBTQ characters in video games. And originally we had another topic on deck for this week, but yesterday, December 20th, Blizzard released their winter comic, their final comic for the year, as a part of the Overwatch series. And it was Reflections, I think is the title. Is that right, John?
Yep, that's correct.
And they revealed in this comic their long-teased, they've been talking about this for a while, their long-teased gay character, and it's Tracer, their flagship character for the Overwatch property. And, after seeing this and hearing some of the conversation get generated online, we wanted to join the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
But I want to take a second and just frame that and say that while we want to join the conversation here, we've got no plans to discuss many of the well-documented problems with minority representation in games, not because it's not important, but because there's lots of people doing it. There's a great video. It's a couple years old now, but put out from the Game Theorists. We'll put it in the show notes, called "Are Video Games Anti-LGBT?" And if you're interested in this topic or interested in exploring particularly those properties or the community doing it really poorly, that's a good place to start. And there's lots of other great places to go from there, but that's a good place to start. What we're going to do in this is take a look at those games and developers that we feel make a good faith effort. That doesn't mean that they succeed. That doesn't mean they're immune to criticism, because I'm going to have some, and I'm sure you will as well.
Mm-hmm.
But we wanted to take a look at those people that we thought were really making an effort to try to improve representation of LGBTQ characters and the LGBT community in their properties. So in that regard, we're going to take a look at what works and what doesn't in that context. So to begin, John, you read the Reflections comic, right?
Yes, I read it yesterday, and it is blown up on the internet. I mean, almost everybody's conversing about it at this point. So it starts off, if you want me to just give a quick
Yep.
narrative, I
Yeah,
definitely
please.
encourage, please go read it. It is actually well animated. It does do a cell-by-cell frame as you're reading it, so it's kind of a neat interactive comic. But what it goes through, it details the characters of Overwatch. There are some absent, but the main story arc to it is Tracer, and she's looking for a gift for whomever. And she's zipping around in her Tracer fashion. And she tries to pick up a scarf. Somebody already had been looking at it, so doing the nice Tracer thing, what she's known for, her kind soul, she gives it up. Somebody hands her a package at the end of her run saying, thank you for saving XYZ. I forget the exact detail. And she goes home and puts the package down, and she's, in her t-shirt and jumpsuit, or t-shirt and pants, I guess. The very controversial pants that caused an uproar on the internet as well. Apparently Blizzard likes uproars with Tracer. But so you see a conversation happening off screen, and then you see another female. It's like, okay, cool, maybe they're roommates. Like, nobody really knows what the relationship is.
Right.
They go through, and then her friend, or who this person, opens a package, and then slips in for a kiss. And it's like, at that moment, it's like, surprise gay. And then it goes through, basically, most of the comic is then just single panels of the rest of the characters, as Winston is trying to have, a Christmas dinner, and then Tracer and her girlfriend, her partner, show up for the dinner, and then it just pan through like the rest of the characters, and you get to see how they're doing for the rest of the holidays. And that was it. It was a very short comic, but it was very prominent. Blizzard very well, and it was subtle, it was poignant, and it was done. They didn't carry it on, they didn't make a big commotion, and they didn't make a huge sexual ambience about it. It was just there. Mm-hmm. And it was very natural, and in my opinion, it was very natural to see that. It was what you would expect from any relationship, both heterosexual or, homosexual. And it felt natural, and it was very well done. And I compliment Blizzard for doing such a good job with it, and actually opening the door for this kind of conversation.
So you preempted my first question. I think that's great. So you had largely a positive response. So let's just take a look at it for a second at the comic in isolation,
mm-hmm.
To the extent that that's possible. And I think I agree with you. It's handled well. It's handled tastefully. The fact that she is queer in some respect is not the point. It just is.
Right.
It's no different than if it was a heterosexual couple exchanging gifts at a holiday party or Christmas at home. There's no difference between a heterosexual exchange there and the relationship that Tracer has with her partner in this comic. So I thought that was really well done. But I've seen, and I want to give credit to, you sent me a link from a conversation on Kotaku, and they raised this question. I'm curious to get your opinion on this as well.
Mm-hmm.
What's your opinion, though, of the build-up? So Blizzard has been teasing, essentially, for months that there's going to be an LGBT character revealed at some point in the Overwatch universe. And while I give them good credit for the comic in isolation for being kind of understated and tasteful and just making it a matter of life for these characters, the build-up, though, seems very different to me than the kind of any other reveal about any other character.
Right. And so if there's other characters, other franchises that have done a similar build-up, I believe Dota 2 did one very similarly, with Stormspear coming out as a gay character, and it was kind of one of those like, oh, it's inclusion, and that almost left a sour taste in my mouth, and Blizzard's building up to it kind of left a sour taste in my mouth. I have no problem with what they're doing, but trying to make it seems more trendy. It's like, oh, look, we're being part of the conversation. We're being part of the trend. Like, oh, it's good to have these kind of, inclusions into our game. And it didn't feel like a natural progression to it. Like, if they didn't announce it and just went straight into it, it would have been more genuine.
I'm so glad you said that, because their build-up makes it feel token.
Yes.
Where that it's like they want a pat on the back for something they should just be doing.
And I completely agree to that statement. It's very much, and like other games have done that. Other games have been doing this well before then. I know you had a list of games set up for this that have done it, and some have done well, some haven't, but it's not like this is, brand new. But because Blizzard is probably one of the most prominent properties out there, that it's raising so much of a question. It's actually one of the first, like, putting your flagship character. I mean, she's on the cover. She's, and she was also the first one to cause controversy, excuse me, not, I apologize for my illness. But, with the whole hot pants issue and showing off the goods, this is not the first. The Blizzard's really, like, they're kind of riding the hype train. I mean, come on, Nintendo's already got that going for the NES. Hop off, please. But what are your thoughts, though? I mean, how do you approach this, and what do you think in regards to Blizzard's approach to this?
Well, like I think it's a little bit of just a blind spot, maybe. The build up, I think, really undermines, and it doesn't eliminate, but it does go some distance to undermining the authenticity of the action. It feels to me that, as you noted, if Blizzard had released this comic with no built-up fanfare, it would have been a much more commendable action. That said, I do give them credit, too, for, as you noted, rightly, I think, this is their flagship character. Tracer's on the box. And to make your flagship character a part of Blizzard's staking a claim here, right? They're putting a line in the sand, and they're saying, that diversity matters to us, whether or not they're always hitting it out of the park for being responsible or responsive to diverse communities. That's up for some negotiation, but they're making a good faith effort here, I think.
Right.
And that's really what we want to encourage, at least. I would hate to see that even when implementation goes poorly, I would hate to see them get such backlash, and I don't think they are. Correct me if I'm wrong, John, but my understanding here, it seems like on the most part, I know the internet is a big place, and you can always find communities that are going to be opposed to, well, essentially anything. But it seems like on the whole, critics and fans of Overwatch are responding with mild to extreme praise. It seems like this has largely been a success.
For the most part, you mean, and also there's a subreddit for everything.
Right,
So,
right.
yeah,
obviously.
What I've seen right now is I've seen people, nobody's come out and saying, like, especially of the LGBTQ community, nobody's saying they're insulted. Some are saying, I don't need to be represented. That was very much in the Kotaku article, especially for I believe it's a trans woman. I don't know their staff very well, so I apologize. But they're like, I don't need to be represented. Like, they felt more, like, token in that regard. And that was probably the most negative comment I've read. And others are like, it's great that, a company's taking such strides to say, this is life. This is how it is. And we're not going to shun away from it because of whatever means. So it has been, well received in that regard.
Yeah, I'm glad to see that they're participating in the conversation, even if there's pushback sometimes. Because everyone's going to get pushback. You and I could very likely get pushback on gaps that you and I are going to have just from this conversation, and that would be right. But we don't want to discourage people, companies, products, media from engaging in the conversation, and so I'm glad to see that Blizzard's taking a shot at it. I
mean, Blizzard probably is doing, like, the foot in the door has been there. They're kind of kicking the door open and saying, okay, gaming community, you're a very large community. You have you cover many depths and breadths across the entire public, across the world. You need to enter this conversation now. And it's one of those questions that I kind of have is, how is the community response as a whole going to have? We're seeing a lot of the articles that are coming up now are going to be people who probably are very prominent. So I don't want to necessarily point out, just the articles who are, like, in praise, because we haven't necessarily seen the backlash yet. And I agree with you that there is going to be some regardless, because it is the internet. But, is the community as a whole ready? Is the community as a whole willing to kind of champion this and move forward? Or are they just going to be like, it is what it is. You know what? Maybe that's all that it is.
So I'm glad you asked that, because this hits to something that I think will most likely be a recurring refrain for me in many of our conversations, and that is there seems to me to be a strong desire in the gaming community to be recognized as an art form.
Mm-hmm.
And be given the same level of respect in kind of the public sphere that film and books and music trade in. They have the same kind of cachet that those properties trade in. And my thought is that if you want and you believe that video games can be art, and I'm not claiming Overwatch is, but if your belief is that video games can be or already are, art deals with these kinds of topics, social issues, political issues, and we can't. One thing I've seen said, and in critique, I guess, of this decision, is someone saying, I play Overwatch. Why the hell should I care what the sexual preferences of any of these characters? It's not a narrative game, and there's critique saying that this is just a political statement for the sake of making a political statement.
Mm-hmm.
So why are they putting it in this game? It's not like it's a game like Final Fantasy or even Grand Theft Auto, or where there is a strong narrative component, where it makes sense in the framework of the existing game. In playing Overwatch, there's never an opportunity really that you're going to encounter any of the characters' sexual preferences. But I think games and their subsequent attached media need to be able and be free to think about these things, and to think about character representation, and think about diverse communities, and be free to explore those ideas without people reacting in such a fashion as to say, but not in this kind of game, but not in this kind of activity. It seems strange to want to limit the game as art discussion to narrative games, or to Shadow of the Colossus kind of thing, atmospheric, stylized games, and then say, oh, but we're going to have this whole segment of the industry, shooters, right, where we're going to segregate them, and they can kind of be what they want and independent, and don't need to be, or shouldn't be, I guess maybe even worse, shouldn't be responsive to broader political conversations. And I think that to think about it, to put it in other terms, you think about literature or you think about film, that's to say that a horror movie can't talk to us about serious concepts. That's to say that a comedy can't talk to us about meaningful political discourse. And our society, our culture, would be greatly diminished if we had approached those art forms with that mindset, that there is a certain thing that should just have as broad appeal as possible and shouldn't risk offending anyone. And so I think this is a very long-winded way of me saying I don't really care if the community's ready or willing. If you believe that gaming is important, which I do, I do think it's kind of a new wave form of artistic expression. And so if you believe that like I do, I think you have to say, tough shit.
That's very well said.
Those are my 2 cents on whether or not the community is ready. I'm not sure how you feel.
I'm hopeful for the future. I mean, I do share a lot of the sentiments of tough shit. It has to happen, because it does. This is the transcendence of society, and it's the opening of the doors to make sure that it is an inclusive environment, and it is an inclusive culture, and art does represent that. And I do agree with you. Art, gaming is art from FPS down. Some people don't believe like sports games aren't art. Well, in some regards they are, in some regards they aren't, depending on how you define it. But my concern with the community is a lot of the anonymity. Through my years of playing games, I've seen a lot of hate speech, a lot of homophobic rhetoric, because people are anonymous. People are hiding behind screens, and whether or not they feel that way, they can say it. And if they can say it, that damage and those words are out there. And in an area where only words are the only form of communication, that speaks volumes. And that's where I'm hoping that the growth of the community can. I'm not looking for this, banding together and everybody holding the flag and marching forward, but I'm hoping that as a general consensus we can move forward as a group and say, we accept and we move on. And we move on in a regard of not just blindly, hey, it's there, okay, whatever, we're dealing with it, but everybody's part of us. We are gaming as a whole. We're a community as a whole. And that's where I want to hope that the community is there. I don't share necessarily the same point of we're going to have to just do it and get over it, but I want the community to grow that way. I want to see that transcend that way. And in some instances, you do see that. In some forms, you do see it as a heavy-handed way, like World of Warcraft or any of the MMOs. Like, if there's any hate speech or anything like that, they come down hard. And
Right.
in some forms, it's justifiable. You want that to happen because you want to see these companies coming in and protecting, but not in a way that seems like token or condescending. And that's where I get a little worried with the way Blizzard's doing it. Is it condescending? Is it, we're happy that it's happening. It's good to open that door, but, it comes back to the first point you made, is that build-up, is that going to overshadow how good this is? What is going to be the long-term impact of that?
Yeah, and I think ultimately, it's keeping in mind that they are a for-profit institution, right?
Definitely.
They're trying to make money, and that being socially responsive, or responsive to social concerns and considerations, is good for business for the most part, and they want credit for that,
Yes.
and they want to make money for that decision.
They want the pat on the back.
It does it maybe make it feel a little slimy, maybe.
And I don't want it to be, because the way they did it with the comic just felt genuine. It was kind of like, it's almost like I can't even think of a good analogy, and that's strange. Usually I'm really good at this. It's just like you have the shining star of how. Well, go ahead.
What I'd like to do here, I think, is, because where we seem to be talking around is where I wanted to take us next anyway, to start to talk about some other properties, developers, games that have also been engaged in this conversation about representation, and maybe have done it well, maybe have done it poorly. And so the first kind of, and I'm going to start with the big one. The first, I want to bring up a whole suite of games and properties that we can kind of talk about in whole. And I don't know that there's any developer out there, and if you know of one, please share with us in the comments, but I don't know that there's any developer out there that's been more engaged with this conversation for a longer period of time than BioWare. And going back as far as the original KOTOR, which I think is well over a decade old at this point, Knights of the Old Republic, originally released on the original Xbox, where there was a Jedi character, Juhani, who was a lesbian. I think that was the first LGBT representation in BioWare's games. And again, I haven't played much of their older properties, so if there's stuff preceding, please leave a note in the comments. But and then, very notably, they got a lot of press, some good, some bad, for representation in the Mass Effect trilogy, and then again in the Dragon Age series with their most recent property, Dragon Age Inquisition, not only having a character who identifies as gay and whose identification doesn't change depending on the gender of the player character. So he identifies as gay regardless of whether or not you choose to be a character that's female or male. But they also have a trans character in the most Dragon Age Inquisition. So, and they too sometimes promote that these characters are coming down the pipeline, but they've been engaged in doing this for a long time, and so at the very least, I give them credit for, one, allowing you in many instances, and these are kind of series renowned for their narrative, really giving a lot of player agency in these games, though, letting you pick your gender, pick who you romance, and constantly pushing to expand the ways in which the community can engage with these relationships without being prescriptive. If you identify as heterosexual and you are cisgendered, and you can engage with BioWare's games in such a fashion as, for the most part, you would not know that there are homosexual, trans characters in their properties. Because if you don't want it to come up, it doesn't have to come up. It's just a part of these characters' lives. It's not who these characters are.
And do you think that BioWare did a good job with that then?
So yeah, I think for the most part they did something. And this takes us a little off topic, but I wanted to bring this up since we are talking about BioWare. One thing that always feels a little hollow to me, though, is this idea in the BioWare games as kind of the as sexualization and sex as the reward for romance, and kind of like the gamification of love. So I think video games on the whole don't do a great job of having romances.
I agree.
I think and I think the games that try, they're generally poorly written and pretty broad. And I think a lot of people might point to BioWare games as an example where that's good, but I actually think it's an example of where it's often pretty bad, because the way the game plays out is often the kind of culmination of the romantic gesture in any of these games is intercourse. And you kind of have to guess at the right command, at the right conversational replies, knowing the character, to try and basically unlock the sex scene, essentially. And once that's done, unless they're going to kill the character off later, the romantic engagement is kind of over. That's the culmination. And so it seems strange to me. It reads strangely to me. And so that's where I think they begin to miss cues. Is it kind of devalues, I think. While I give them credit for offering these relationships, it's not offering them, I think, in many times it's not offering them as nuanced relationships. It's offering them as kind of sexual rewards.
Right. And
so that's my concern.
And that is something that a lot of games do. You know, there are a few who don't. One that I can name is Stardew Valley, which you're thinking, how can a farm simulator actually have any, social nod? And it is one of another games that allow you to pretty much go and be married to whomever or I think whatever. And, that one probably does go through where the goal is not to necessarily just have intercourse, but it is almost to raise a family and to start living what would be more of a classical neo-American farm life of I have a wife or I have a husband or whatever orientation that goes in. And then we're going to have kids in some form or fashion.
And I don't want to say that the establishment of a family needs to be the reward, or that sex can't be a part of the game, because like I said, if games are going to be art, sex has got to be in there.
Yeah.
But my concern is that that's the only reward, and that the relationship doesn't progress after that point. The relationship kind of stalls. You've hit... The characters have had sex, and then they stop giving you romance options.
Right.
Like you feel like the relationship stagnates then for however many hours of the game remain, and that's what I find troubling. Even if it falls apart, that's okay. Even if the relationship crumbles after that, but they just kind of give up on the relationship aspect once sex is accomplished.
Yeah, they don't want to accept like there's life behind, or life beyond.
Yeah. So that always reads a little bit weirdly to me. And then another game I want to highlight quickly, and I apologize to our audience. John, I don't think you've played this one either. Last of Us?
No, I have not.
Okay. So I do want to quickly, I'll talk quickly here. Last of Us, I want to note, for great representation for two characters. The first, there's a character named Bill that you encounter in the course of the main campaign, just the Last of Us story arc, who... I don't even remember if it's necessary that it's revealed or if it's an optional reveal. It's been so long since I played the game. But this is a post-apocalyptic world, and Bill lost his partner. And like I said, I don't think it's required. I don't think it's part of a cutscene that you find out that Bill was gay. And it's great, really, because what you find is that he's just going through the same kind of genuine grief and anguish and emotional responses that anybody would have, regardless of their sexual desires. Mm-hmm. And it just, the whole relationship just feels genuine. and none of it's played as a gag, none of it's played as a stereotype. It's just very serious, and it's and I think that's kind of and they didn't promote that it was coming. You didn't know that you it's not like you spent the game looking for this, which made it a really kind of nice, tender reveal for people playing the game. Um, I thought. And then the big reveal comes later in the DLC that Ellie, kind of the closest we've got to a flagship character before Tracer, um, the little girl in Last of Us, um, has a relationship with a friend of hers a female friend of hers prior to the start of the main campaign. Now, whether or not Ellie would identify as gay or queer, or question it, we don't know, but it's clear that there's interest. And again, it was not they didn't get this kind of coming down the pipe talk that Blizzard gave us.
Mm-hmm.
Naughty Dog just did it. Which is why I think in part that speaks to Naughty Dog's commitment not only to great gameplay but to great storytelling.
Yeah, that is definitely something that I can appreciate. And I think I hit on it earlier, is like, I love the genuinity in games. I love when games are not trying to shove the message down your throat, but naturally progress and naturally evolve into those conversations. And, from not playing Last of Us and hearing it and discussing it earlier, that gives me, I give props to Naughty Dog. They are a very good storyteller in that regard. And I'm very excited to hear them being able to do and have these complex conversations, but in such a natural way that it's not going, we have a gay character, by the way, it's right here, look at us, we're doing it. It's like, yeah, it's very much just life.
Right.
And that's life.
Yeah, I think that's great. I've only got one more thing I want to say. So before I begin to wrap us up, is there anything else you want to discuss or offer before we begin to close?
It's a matter of, it's a very short topic. I'm just going to kind of recap on it. Is, it's part of being progressive is just understanding and accepting. It's looking as a community is just looking at it. It's kind of hard. I don't want to be preachy here, so I apologize if I feel like I'm standing on a soapbox. But just definitely, like, looking at it. Don't just go, oh well, fuck them because they just didn't. They're shoving it down our throats. But just look at what Blizzard is trying to do. And
that's a great question. I want to ask you really quickly. Sorry for interrupting, but you brought up, I think, a good point. So this kind of shoved down our throat comment, I guess it's just a comment, and then maybe I'd love to hear you respond. Something I thought Blizzard did that was clever in this regard is this is done through attached media, not through the core game.
Right.
So it really kind of preempts that shoved down our throat criticism, I think. What do you think?
And I agree. I agree and I disagree. It's very much a dichotomy in my own mind where, because Overwatch does not have a narrative, the narrative is told outside of it. So it's kind of this conjoined piece where I don't have to play the game. I don't have to know anything about these characters. I am just going to point and shoot and click. I'm run and shoot man or woman or person, whatever. I'm a robot. I'm an omnic for all intents and purposes. And then, the side narratives, which, by the way, if you have not watched any of them, they are fantastic. Blizzard has this knack, and always had this knack, of telling great stories with their media, with their movies, with their capture. I love Blizzard. I pretty much play all Blizzard's IPs. I'm a Blizzard whore. I'm sorry. BlizzCon, please accept me. Anyway, but, yeah, so it feels like, it's not shoved down the throat because you don't have to ingest it. You don't have to go find it. You don't have to. But if you're following the media forgetting that narrative, it kind of does feel like, okay, now here's the character. Like, it was so well done, but it's kind of like you built up to it, though. It goes right back to that first point, is because if it wasn't built up, my point would be, like, Blizzard, you did such a fantastic job. Everything's great, blah, blah, blah. But they love their countdown clocks. They love to do that. I mean, they did it with the Somber ARG. They've done it with almost every patch note. Like this big ticking clock, like, here we come, guys, like, here comes the Blizzard train. And then, then it's there, and it's so well done. And I almost wish, like, their PR team kind of would have sat back and said, let's just let this one happen.
Just taking the foot off the gas a little bit.
Right, just let it evolve. Again, back to the genuinity and naturality of it. Make sure I said that word right. is just let it happen. Just kind of like what Naughty Dog did. Just let it happen.
Yeah.
Let the community engage your conversation. Don't make them feel like you're pushing them, because if you open a door and let them walk through, you're going to get a better response rather than opening the door and then shoving them through and saying, "Okay, here it is, now talk about it."
Or
Hey,
in
look.
Blizzard's case, running the door at them.
Yeah, ready? It's like, "Here's the door, open it now." Blizzard's really good for that.
So I do want to say one. I want to highlight one more game, and I won't take forever talking about it, but I think it's important because I think, to me, this is probably the single greatest narrative accomplishment in games I've ever played, and I don't say that lightly. But if you haven't played Gone Home, the game has, it's not, I guess it was an indie game, but it's achieved quite a bit of success. So calling it indie now might be a little bit of a stretch, but it's you, spoiler alerts. I'm not gonna try and reveal anything, but you play a character, a woman who comes home, I think from some time abroad, to find her family's home empty. They've clearly still lived there. Maybe they're out. Who knows where they are? But there's clearly been some drama or tension in the home, and she's trying to figure out what's been going on with her parents. And as the game progresses, more and more with her sister, and you really take an in-depth look at this character and her life for the last year or so, maybe a little more. And I'm not going to say any more because I don't want to spoil it. It's short. It's super short. I want to say it's like 2.5 hours. It's the length of a good movie. And it gets criticized as one of those, walking simulator games where there's not a ton of gameplay. It's not a lot of puzzles. It's an exploration game. You're just exploring your surroundings and trying to come to a fuller understanding of these other characters. But like I said, it's an accomplishment in narrative design and narrative restraint and patience that I think anyone who wants to design video games that address these topics should be forced to play. I think it's a game that's going to be studied whenever we get around to having significant and meaningful courses in universities about games and game development and game design and game theory, and it's relevant here. Like I said, I won't go any further, but it's important, I think, to this conversation. So if you want to talk with your friends about it at home, sit down and play Gone Home. It's worth your time, it's worth your money, and it's important to this conversation. So that's all I want to say about Gone Home. But for our viewers, what do you think about the Reflections comic from Blizzard? What are your opinions on LGBT representation in games and the gaming community? What games do you think do it well? What games do you think don't do it well? Let us know in the comments below. So this has been the Video Game Review. I'm Colin.
I'm John.
And if you liked what you saw here, like, subscribe, share. If you didn't, well, you know what to do. Let us know. And as always, until we see you next week, keep the conversation going.
All right.